just a difference in the way that presentations are made in the different fields. So it's very important that you be talking to your mentors and finding out what you really should be doing. You want experience doing what's normal in your field, okay? And we're on the undergraduate research conference this year. We're making a difference between the paper presentations where we have a panel and the oral presentations. So one of the things that we'll be talking about is how to write that paper. So we're going to talk about how to write a paper in the humanities. This is information that can go into any field, so you've got opportunities. All right, so plagiarism. How many of you have ever heard ignorance of the law is no excuse? Oh goodness, that was one of the things my dad always said to me. Well, I didn't know what the speed limit was. Okay, it's your responsibility to know the law, and it's your responsibility to know the rules. Plagiarism is when you take someone else's words or work and claim it as your own. I said this, I did this, I wrote this. Okay? If you didn't, then that's plagiarism. Okay? And it's very important that you be careful with this because you can get expelled. You can flunk a class, you can be expelled from the university. Okay? So plagiarism is a very important kind of thing. Yes?
And in last semester, I encountered this situation. I did not say it's my opinion. I just quoted, but without a citation or something. Is that a kind of plagiarism?
Absolutely. If it's not your words and it's not your work, then you would have to cite it, where it came from, who said it, whose work it was, whose research it was, and you cite that. Okay. What's your major?
Sociology.
Okay. So in sociology, you may be looking at case studies or statistical information, whatever it is. But if it's not yours, if you didn't do the research, you have to cite who that came from. Either the article that it came from, the research, the person. You know, there are lots of ways to get information. You could actually have an interview with someone, but that would have to be cited, okay? In my conversation with fill in the blank, Samuel Adams, we discussed blah, 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 blah. But that's a citation. That's telling them that the information came from Samuel Adams, not you.
But sometimes it's a coincidence, I think. By accident, it's just, perhaps I have this some kind of ideas or information, but just a coincidence with other people, but I did not know. It's my own idea.
Well, one of the things that you want to be very, very careful about is that you make a distinction between what you know that you have taken notes from someone else and what is your own ideas, okay? Because, we have software programs here at the university, and we can put your paper through that software program, and it will tell us the percentage of, likelihood that it is plagiarized, okay? Now, there is that, that gray area where you say, well, I'm talking about the same thing they're talking about, but it's my research, or I did this, or whatever. And there is that gray area, but you want to be very, very careful that you never claim to have done the research that you haven't, or to use word for word from someone else's research. Okay. Okay. So plagiarism, big important thing here. Now, when you're writing a paper, how many of you have to write really long papers? What's the longest paper you've written?
More than 90 minutes.
Okay, all right, you're special. What's the longest one you've ever written?
Just like
10 pages. You? 10 writing a long paper. All right? For our purposes, we're going to talk about a 15 to 20 page paper. Okay? This is double spaced. So don't think, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to think of something and write for 20 pages single spaced, with little tiny margins. You want to format it so that it's easy to read. No, never, ever, ever have less than 1 inch margins. Okay? You never want to do anything less than double space. All right? Now, there will be times when you're thinking, oh, I've got so much to say, and they told us we can't go over 6 pages, and I'm going to use space and a half, or I'm going to use 9-point font. Okay, well, what you have to remember is who's reading it, and what are they going to do with it. If I'm reading it, I'm looking to see if the ideas make sense and the grammar's correct and all of that stuff. But what are you doing? What's the professor reading it for? They're making sure you understand the information. And based on whether you understand that information, you get a, come on, what do you get? You get a grade, all right? If they are so tired that they can't read it, if you use 9-point font and they can't read it, what kind of grade are you going to get? I am so tired. F. I just don't want to even play with this. Okay? So you want to think in terms of what is reasonable. No less than 1 inch margins. And I'll tell you, for me, I want 12-point font. But you may want to go down to 11-point font. But pay attention to the font you're using. If I say Times New Roman and you can go down to 11-point font, that's okay. But have any of you ever seen some fonts where it says it's 12-point and it's already microscopic? Then you don't want to go to 11-point. Okay? Pay attention and think about who's going to be reading it and the purpose of why they're reading it. Okay? Okay. I recommend that you schedule time and that you block it. Okay? If you have a calendar and you keep a calendar, then you want to block 1 hour increments, 2 hour increments. If you can stand it and work on it all afternoon, hey, have a 4-hour increment. When do you do your best work? Okay, do you know?
I do it night hours.
At night, okay. All right, well, I'm one of those people who does it best in the morning. I can get up at 5 o'clock and do a whole lot more, and it's better than if I try to stay up past 9 o'clock and write. At 9 o'clock, I fall asleep. Okay? So you have to know when you do your best work. And if you know that it's best at night, that's when you want to block your time. If you know it's your best in the morning, that's when you want to block your time. Okay? So you have those opportunities. Right? Then the other thing I'm going to tell you is, can you write a 20-page paper in one sitting? Probably not. So what you want to do is you want to give yourself an opportunity. We talk about writing first drafts and then editing. And I'm going to tell you that you want to take, especially if it's a 15 to 20 page paper, you want to take it and you want to do it in chunks. You want to do your introduction. You want to do, first section, second section, third section. Then you want to do your conclusion. Or you may want to wait and write your introduction at the very end when you've, gotten everything else done. Okay? It's entirely up to you. But it's what's important, okay, is when do you work best, and making sure that you have that kind of opportunity. Okay. So we talked about plagiarism, and we talked about inadvertently sounding like you had plagiarized someone else's work. Okay, here's where taking notes is important, all right? You want to develop a system that will follow you through the entire time that you're writing, okay? So, develop a system do you take notes on a computer?
Both.
Both. Okay. Who does it mostly by hand? Okay. And who does it mostly by computer? All right. So we're about split even, Stephen. It doesn't matter to me which way you do it. Just develop a system. Develop a system where you know that this is their words. Okay. Even if you're writing it in your own words, you want to say, okay, this is theirs. So if you're doing it on a computer, you may do it in colors. So blue means I'm summarizing what they said. And red means this is a word for word, what they said, word for word. Okay. Then you want to be able to tell me who said it, who are the authors of the paper, or whatever else it is you're looking at, the textbook, the chapter. What's the source, what's the page number. All right. You want to get as much information so that it's easy for you to create your citation. All right? You want to know, if you read the entire article and you summarize the entire article, then you want to know that it's pages 60 through 72. Okay? If you took a quote out of there and it's quoted word for word, then you want to know exactly what page that's on. You want that so that the next person who reads what you've written can go back and find it. Okay? That's all you're doing, is you're providing the next person a roadmap to get back to what you found. Okay? So that's what your bibliography is, that's what your reference list is, that's what your citation is. It's a roadmap to get back to where you said you got it. Okay? Now, have any of you ever written a wonderful, wonderful paper and the professor handed it back to you and said, we need citations? Okay, well, I have. It was a great paper. And they said, you gotta have citations. All right, well, I knew where everything had come from because I had developed that system. I just hadn't put it in there. I didn't think they wanted it. Okay? I was able to go back, insert it, print it out again, and turn it in, okay? But you know ahead of time that you're going to need citations for everything that you do, okay? Now, we've talked. I know that some of you are in different areas, sociology, psychology, different places. So depending on what you're doing, you've got to know what's the style manual they expect you to follow, okay? In psychology, it's going to be the APA. American Psychological Association Handbook, okay? But if you're in English, it's probably going to be MLA, okay? The Modern Language Association Handbook. If you're in something else, and trust me, I've got a stack of them this wide, so I've got, I think, every one that anybody's using on this campus. You've got to know their style manual. The style manual will give you information about it, how to set up your citations, what they should look like, okay, all of that. So more than anything, you got to know what style manual, okay? And I read a lot of syllabi in my job, and if there's a paper on there, they will tell you, in the syllabus, use this style manual, or they will tell you exactly how they want it turned in and how they want it formatted. Okay? So, everybody, do you know what style manual you're supposed to be using in your area? Everybody? Okay. All right. So, with an idea of what you're doing in university studies, where you've got 3 areas, you may have to know 3 different kinds of style manuals. All right. Find out. Okay. Because in economics, I haven't really, done economics, but I have done a marketing person who worked with an economics professor, and so I know what she had to do. So they've got their style manual, or they've got something that they want you to follow. Just find out what it is. Okay, now I'm going to tell you when you're taking notes, be selective, all right? Figure out what is the most recent and most relevant information, okay? If you're supposed to be looking at economic upheaval in, the past 20 years, where are you going to cut off looking at stuff? Where? 20 years ago, okay? So, if it's not relevant, don't pull it up. We had a student who wanted to include in their thesis some articles from a journal that were dated in the 1920s, okay? So we were going, oh my goodness, no, that can't be relevant. You certainly had to have had more information than that, but it had a specific piece of information that he wanted in it. So I'm not telling you you can't ever use anything that's old, but you need to be looking at what's most relevant. And I have seen the syllabi, so I've seen where a professor will say, you must use 10 sources, journal articles, books, whatever, but they can't be anything over 7 years old, okay? So know what you're doing. Find out if it's relevant. And then pay attention to what you're looking at, especially if you're looking at statistical information where they say 75% of the people who were interviewed said blah, 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 okay? Well, if there were only 6 people interviewed, 75% is how many people? And you can't really equate that to, the entire population of the country or the world or whatever, okay? So pay attention to those kinds of things. Expect to take more notes than you will actually use in your paper, okay? Write notes and write notes and write notes, okay? Then you can go back and say, all right, I don't need that, so we'll cut that. But if you've got more information, it's easier to write a good paper and cut out stuff that doesn't belong than it is to not have enough notes, not have enough information, and try to fluff it up to make it fit those pages. Okay? Because, trust me, we all recognize fluff. You recognize it when you're writing it. I recognize it when I'm reading it. So do those professors. Okay? So, take more notes than you think you'll need. Okay. One thing I would tell you is when you are looking at stuff, you can look at abstracts and metadata online. Okay? Look at that abstract, look at that information, and decide, is this worth reading the entire article? Okay? If it's reading the entire article, then you can say, okay, I'm going to scan this real fast. Okay, I scanned it real fast, I took a little bit of notes, this doesn't really have any more relevance, and you move along. But if it's an article that has a lot of relevance to what you're wanting to do, you're going to read it very carefully, much more slowly, and you're going to take a lot more notes. And you're going to be careful with the notes that you take, all right? Because that's important to you. All right? So, any questions up to this point? Yes, ma'am.
And the taking notes, is that a draft of your paper, or it's just a collection of the original materials?
I think it would be a collection of what you think is most important from the original materials, from your primary sources, primary and secondary sources.
It's not, you're not an outline of your paper.
No. But you can certainly utilize an outline to help you organize your notes. Okay.
So outline comes before or after the taking notes?
I think it would come probably with all of it together.
Okay.
Yeah, because once you start seeing what your notes are saying, you can say, oh, all right, well, I'm going to need to say this in the first section, this in the second section, and oh, I don't have enough for that second section, so I need to find some more notes. I need to find some more sources. Okay, so I would tell you that there's no step 1, step 2, step 3. I would tell you create whatever step-by-step works best for you. Okay, because you know what works for me may not work for everybody. So just create what works best for you. Develop that. Oh, everybody, do y'all want this to keep empty? I don't know if you have this back. I'm sorry, I should have. Oh, are there some more? Thank you. That. Yes. Cool. All right. Okay. When you're developing your topic, you want to develop a reading list. You may not read everything that's on your reading list, but you want to have a list of books that you can say, or articles that you can say, okay, I need to look at these and see what's relevant, okay? Books, journals, primary documents. How many of you know who your librarian is for your major here in the library? Yay. All right. Some of you don't, and that's something you need to find out, okay? Because that is a person who is targeted strictly for your major or toward your major, and they will help you. Yes, ma'am.
Like, when you say a librarian, like strictly for your major, is that like science and like your department, or
What's your
your
major?
actual major?
What's your major?
I'm a German major.
Let's see. So, classical and modern languages. It looks like her name is, or I hope that's a girl, lady, Donnell Callender. So, here's a list of the librarians here in the library.
And what would you suggest we, I guess, primarily use them for? I guess.
Well,
I've never been associated with a librarian, I guess.
well,
or
I would
ever
tell you that
utilize their
when you
resources.
are starting a project like this, that you're going to want to speak with a librarian and maybe ask what are the most reliable, relevant journals for this topic that I'm researching. What is does the university own any specific journals in this area that I'm researching? What suggestions would you make to me about this? So they're going to be able to help you, and they're going to have a lot of knowledge, and it's just right up here, and they're ready to hand it out to you. I promise. They're going to be excited to have someone come in and ask questions.
So, the Science Center had its own library?
At the Health Sciences Center? Yeah, yes, they do.
Oh, sorry.
That one came
No,
from
like
TTU Library, so it may not have
Yeah,
anything on
that's
there.
kind of crazy.
Okay. Well, you can certainly go to the HSC and talk to a reference librarian. Anybody's going to be able to help you. Okay.
Which one would be like English, I guess? Or like if you were doing something on poetry,
Poetry?
yeah, which librarian would be able to help you?
Well, I think the classical and modern languages and literature,
Would probably be able to.
yeah, but there may be others that are on here that would help you.
She is the English one too.
Okay? Alright. Okay. Then the other thing I'm going to tell you is when you're developing your reading list, look for a bibliography that has been published. in your area, okay? A guide that says, this is the most recent relevant literature on this subject, okay? That will give you a quick, access to the abstracts, and you can decide, okay, I need to get the entire article, or nope, that's not what I need, and you can go on, okay? But you have that opportunity. When you're reading these articles, look at the footnotes, look at the reference lists. Whose name keeps showing up? If Ben Smith is listed as a reference in 5 of the 6 articles you've read, then, skip the articles and go straight to Ben Smith. Figure out what he's written and read what he has written instead of reading the articles that cite him. Okay? And then book reviews, right? But not the New York Times book reviews, not what you're going to read in the Sunday newspaper. You want the book reviews that are written, they're peer book reviews, okay? I've read this, I'm an expert in this area, this is what I think about this book, this article, whatever it is, okay? But that's important to you, to know what other people are in that area are saying. Okay, move from the general to the defined, okay? Here's my big topic. Then I'm going to have section 1, section 2, section 3. I'm going to have an introduction. I'm going to have a conclusion. And in section 1, I'm going to have this topic, this topic, this topic. You can write topic sentences. You can write an outline. But you want to go from this big thing to the much more general. To the more defined. Okay? From general to definite. Then think about the length of the paper. If it's 10 pages, how many resources are you going to need? If it's 20 pages, how many resources are you going to need? And how much time do you have? If you have a semester to write this paper, you need to start your research that very first week it's assigned. Okay? If you have a week to write this paper, you don't want to wait till the night before to write it. Okay? Because you're not going to be able to get all of the information you need to write it. And then what's the key question? What are you trying to answer in your paper? Okay? Are you trying to answer, for psychology, are you trying to answer, what are the psychological, what's the psychological impact of, computer games, all right? Or, is it much more specific than that? The psychological impact on 4-year-olds who play, Angry Birds. Okay? So that's what you want to do. What's the key question, and what do you want to know from that? All right, any questions up to this point? Okay. Create a plan. What's your timeline? Remember we talked about blocking time? Now you want to create your plan. What's your first thing you're going to do? Research, talk to a librarian, develop a system for taking notes. Whatever it is, that's the first thing you do. Then you're going to have to find materials. What are the best methods for finding your materials? What's the what are you doing with this? Are you looking at are you actually conducting the research, or are you just looking at secondary sources? If you're actually conducting the research, psychology, sociology, all of those, you're going to have IRB approval, Institutional Review Board approval, because you're using real people. If you are using little rats or mice or whatever, then you're going to have to get permission from the institutional, the Animal Control and Use Committee. Okay? So if you are using anything that's a primary source, you're going to have to go get permission. And permission means that you create permission means that you create an application for it. You apply for this, and it takes time. Okay, so there may be some reasons why. Oh, for this 20-page paper that's due at the end of the semester, you don't want to do your own research. But if you're doing a thesis or a dissertation, then you have time and you may want to do that. Okay. Think about the ethical issues of what you're doing, all right? So you have time constraints, but what are the ethical issues? So if you, let's say you wanted to figure out how long before a 3-year-old would have a tantrum if every time they started to take a bite of cookie, you took the cookie away from them. Okay? Anybody see any ethical issues with that? Yes, yes. Besides just being mean, it's unethical, to let a child have a cookie and then every time they're about to take a bite, take it away from them. You would create a monster. Okay? So, the reason you have IRB and IACUC approval committees is to make sure that the ethical issues, okay, we don't want you as the individual researcher to get into trouble, and we don't want the university to get into trouble.
What's the name of the animal, guys?
IACUC.
What's that sound?
The I think, is the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee. And now I want a gold star for knowing what all that stood for.
Animal care.
And Use Committee.
I
Yes.
have a question. I will be doing a paper on family violence, and perhaps I will do some interview or some imaginary or method or something. I don't know. And what permission should I get?
You would have to get, if you're going to use actual people to interview for your research, you would have to get IRB approval,
Where?
the Institutional Review Board.
Where is this organization located?
It's here on campus. Go to the website. It's called the Institutional Review Board. So if you go to ttu.edu and search for IRB or Institutional Review Board, you'll find the website.
Or even if I interview my classmates, and
Yep.
should I also get the permission?
Yep. Yes.
Really?
Yes.
But
It's a little different to us because for me, I work with some other organization as a researcher, and we can go with the district board for permission and conduct research. And for the students, there is not that kind of approval needed to conduct research. But here is quite different. And what about this process? Do we have to pay something or the process?
No, there's nothing that you have to
Do you
pay.
know how much-
But it takes time.
How long does it take?
It depends on how many people are ahead of you in the
Okay, and
process.
what do we have to submit for that? Like our research, all
You
details?
really need to go to the website to see what their instructions are, because I'm not an expert on that, but you would want to check that out. Yeah.
Does this permission help us to get help from it's like a permit or like a license? If I get the permission, if I interview the people, they will be cooperative because I have this permission?
Well, what our problem with it and our issue is the ethics of it. We're trying to protect you, but we're also trying to protect those people that you're using as research subjects. So in the past, there have been really bad things that have happened because there was no oversight So now we have to have permission. What I would tell you is, if you're working with a professor, a mentor, they may already have that permission, and you would be working under theirs.
Oh.
So you need to check with your mentor about that.
Ah.
That will make a big difference for you.
Yeah.
Okay.
And is there, and what website did you say we could find all these, I guess permission?
If you'll just go to the ttu.edu website,
Okay.
then look for Institutional Review Board. That's for people. And then the IACUC is for animals. And we had a student who was using fish, and they had to get the IACUC approval. So it's
Okay,
it's
and are
anything.
those the only two approvals that are
Uh-huh.
there? That are
People
in
and
place?
animals are all that we're concerned about right now,
Okay.
until we have androids.
Is the animal care and use committee, do they supply animals too, or is that something
No.
else?
That'll be a different area.
And at IACUC?
But IACUC is only for if I interview people, I don't have to go to this.
No, just IRB. So IRB is for people,
Uh-huh.
IACUC is for animals. I realize that people are animals too, but we make a distinction. Okay, so how do you eat an elephant? Come on, cut one bite at a time. Okay, that's how you're going to write your paper. Okay, is one piece at a time. You can't do the whole thing. You have to write drafts, and then you have to edit, and then you rewrite. And if you're lucky, you can get someone else to read it. And if you're even luckier, ask someone else to read it out loud to you. Okay? Because then you're going to hear everything you want to change. Alright? So if you're getting there, if you're getting someone to read it out loud to you, maybe you don't ask them to read the whole thing to you at one time, just little pieces of it, but it's great. So, what we call, you have to have your argument or your thesis, what you're trying to prove or disprove in your paper. Okay. Then, pre-write. The book that I got this out of said that pre-writing was not writing your draft. That pre-writing is writing as you are taking notes. Okay? Now I have a problem with that because then you're mixing up your writing with maybe their writing and what you have to cite. So you want to be careful with that. But if pre-writing works for you, if it's a system that works, utilize it. If making an outline works for you, utilize that. If it's writing topic sentences, if you write the first sentence of every paragraph and then you go back and fill that in, it's okay with me. But it's whatever works for you. Okay? Okay, keep all of your drafts. Don't throw anything away, because you're going to sit down and you're going to go, oh man, that paragraph that I wrote last night was so much better than what I'm writing today. I want to use that instead. And if you've deleted it, if you've thrown it away, if you've put it through the shredder, you are always going to worry that that was a much better paragraph than what you're writing. Okay? So don't throw anything away. Keep your versions. On the computer, it's really easy to have version 1, version 2, version 3. Then I'm also going to tell you, make backups. Alright? How many of you back up everything that you write on a computer? Yay! And the rest of you are going to have someday that horrible thought where it crashes and you've lost it. Okay, back everything up. One easy way to back up a single file is to email it to yourself. Okay? It's always going to be in your Yahoo or in your TU email, and you can always get to it. All right. Okay. here are the steps in pre-writing, okay? According to how to write a BA thesis, okay? This is an entire book about how to write a Bachelor of Arts thesis, okay? So in a thesis, he's looking at this, and it could be anywhere from 40, 50, 60 plus pages, all right? So, good idea, good place to go get some more information, but you set up your categories. You know, what are the main areas that you're going to cover in this? And then you put them in the order that you want to cover them. You know, what's the first category, the second category, the third. And then put items in that category. If you're taking notes on the computer, then you can have a separate electronic file for each category. And then you just stick everything in whatever you want to do. Your Word, your PDF files, whatever it is. If you're taking notes by hand, maybe you want file folders. Okay? It doesn't really matter to me, but do what works for you. Once you've got it all filed, then you start looking for what's missing. Okay? You're not looking at this point to say, oh, I don't need that information anymore. You're looking for, in this category where I say that I want to prove that 3-year-olds don't like cookies, I'm going to need more information. I'm going to need more sources. And that's the holes that you're going to be looking for. All right. Anybody already pre-write? All right. So it works. You know, you might want to try it and see what's good for you. Okay. Write drafts. And then edit. And write some more drafts. And edit. You are never, ever, ever, and I don't care how good anybody tells you your writing is, you are never, ever, ever going to write the best version the first time. Okay? So, you start with your notes. Then you create sentences, you create paragraphs, create sections, and then you have your final draft. Okay? It's a step-by-step process, but I will tell you this, that 1, 2, 3, 4 don't always go in that order. So you want to start with notes, and you may want to think about paragraphs and sections, and then go back to sentences, and then figure out, ooh, I have a hole there, so I have to go back to notes, and start this whole process over again. But don't think it's going to be step 1, step 2, step 3, because it's not. If it were that easy, we'd all be writers. And we would all love it, and we would go, ooh, I can't wait. But it's not that easy. Okay. If you need an example of how to organize your paper, look at the articles that you wrote, that you read, okay? How are they organized? Because that's a good example of, in that field, that's how they do it, so maybe that's how you should do it. And in psychology, it's almost, you know, first you have your abstract, then you have your introduction, then you have your method section, on and on. But find out what's important in the field that you're researching. What is the most, what's the way that they organize their papers, and utilize that. It will help you. Okay. All right. Writing efficiently. Who's your audience? Who are you aiming this at? Are you aiming this at strictly your professor? At your classmates? Is it a larger audience? Do you hope someday to be able to present this information at a conference? Okay. So, who's the audience? All right. Are your arguments clear and convincing? Okay. If they're unclear, they're not going to convince anyone. Okay. So, you've got to give them something that is understandable, easy to understand. So basically I'm going to tell you you don't want to write really, really long sentences that are just too much. Okay? Active voice versus passive voice. How many of you have gotten back a paper where your professor has written passive voice? And that was a bad thing. Yeah. Okay. Passive voice is where the subject is acted upon. The ice cream cone will be eaten by John. Okay? Really? The ice cream cone will be eaten. That's passive, and I'll just tell you, use active voice. John ate the ice cream cone. Okay? That's active voice, where the person who did the action comes first. Okay. How many of you have read Ernest Hemingway and William Faulkner? Ernest Hemingway, The Old Man and the Sea. Faulkner, yeah, lots of short stories. And probably, okay. Hemingway wrote in very short, succinct sentences. It's beautifully written because he was a great writer, but his sentences are short. Faulkner wrote, you'd start a sentence and 3 pages later, you'd finally get to the end of that sentence. Okay? He wrote very long, convoluted sentences. Okay, so I'm going to recommend that you take and split the difference between Ernest Hemingway, short and choppy, and Faulkner, which is this long. Okay? You want to vary the length of your sentences. If you have a short sentence, the next sentence probably needs to be longer. Okay? If it takes longer than 3 lines to write your sentence, to type it out, it's too long. Turn it into 2 sentences. If you've forgotten what you were saying at the beginning of the sentence, by the time you get to the end, it's too long. Start over. Okay? This is where having someone read it out loud to you is very, very helpful. You know? You can, make your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your child, anybody say, here, read this page to me. And it will help you identify the things that you want to change. Sure.
Why in the GRE test, the reading, comprehension reading, very long paragraph, and I think it's selected from the best writing or something academic should be allowed or should be, and I think it's necessary.
Long sentences?
Yeah, because
Absolutely. If you can follow them. But if not, if it's so difficult, if you've got phrases within phrases within phrases, then that's too difficult for the reader. Okay? You may understand because you're the expert, and it makes perfect sense to you.
But because as a person in GRE, long sentences and sentence completion, those are very complex sentences.
I don't really know anything about the GRE. I took it so long ago that I don't think.
But also in GRE writing, if your article is only composed of simple sentences, your score should be very low, So that means, and the long
But
sentences.
there's a difference between simple and easy to understand.
But the cheap vocabularies that's also by GRE. It's cheap
Your
vocabularies.
vocabulary.
Yeah, at least you have to go through 6,000 to 7,000 new words. So that matters in writing.
So I mean, I got the impression that perhaps a good article or a bad article should be a little more complicated, and that will be if your writing is only very simple sentence, that means your writing skills is not very good. Also, do you think?
I don't think that I'm saying that you should only write simple sentences. I'm saying that whatever you're doing, if you're using that complex structure, it needs to be understandable. It needs to be easy to understand. There's a difference between a complex sentence structure that still gets the ideas across and one that is so layered that nobody can understand what you said. By the time you get to the end of it, you're going, what? I don't know what the beginning said. So there's a difference between too simple and that complex structure that, you know, you are going to use sentences that have complex structure, but you're also going to make sure that that sentence is easy to understand.
There are some different kind of writer, like E. Cummings, I don't know if you come across to or not. He has written a poem, Buffalo, this, and he has written everything Michelob, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but he's a poet.
He has poetic license to write that.
He's got poetic license. And you know, and depending on what you're writing, you know, if you're writing for class, you're going to write in one way. Than if you're writing for anything else. You know, if you're writing a blog that is just your opinion, it's going to be a different kind of writing than, you know, what you're writing for class. Or, you know, for your, you know, your thesis or your dissertation. Okay. Okay, what time is it?
About 7 minutes or so.
I have 7 minutes. I am so sorry. Boy, I didn't think I was going to take this long. I thought we were going to zip through this and there wouldn't be anything. Okay, so best writing practices. Know the rules. Whatever is the style guide you should be using it. Okay? Provide the reader with a roadmap. And by that I mean give them clues. Okay? When you're writing, do you use transitions between sentences? Do you use transitional sentences between paragraphs? Or does one thought stop and a new thought start without any explanation to the reader? Okay? We need, you know, we need it to be a little softer than that. We need it to be easy for us. So you have that topic paragraph, you have all of the sentences inside the paragraph that back up what you're thinking, and then you have a transitional, you know. However, you know, other researchers believe something different, and then your next paragraph starts with the different idea, okay? So you use those transitions. Don't summarize your entire paper in the conclusion. Okay? Because what you want them to do is to know what's the most important thing. You are writing your conclusion for what is the most important. The entire paper is made up of, you know, ideas and facts that back up what your thought is. Also, you know, if you're writing something longer like a thesis or a dissertation, your conclusion could be pages and pages long. But if you're writing, you know, a 10, 20 page paper, your conclusion is probably going to be a paragraph, maybe a couple of paragraphs, and that's it. So you cannot do justice to the entire paper. Right? So what do you do in your conclusion?
Redefine main points.
Okay, you're going to reiterate what you're trying to prove in the paper, and then you're going to say, here are the main points that have done that, you know, and then maybe you found out, there's a lot of other stuff that I should have covered, so you can say, you know, for future research or for future exploration, you know, here are other topics, or other things. Okay? So that may not be relevant for every paper, but you do not want to, you know, just summarize in your conclusion. Okay. Sources. All right. I make a distinction between a bibliography, and these two. A bibliography is everything you looked at in order to write your paper. Okay? Something that's in the bibliography may not be in your reference list. To me, a works cited and a reference list are the same thing. If you quoted them, if you reference them in the paper, they're going to be either in here or here. Okay? But this could be a list of 50 or 60 articles that you looked at in order to get enough information to have 10 in your works cited list. Okay? So I make a distinction between that. You make sure that whatever your field is, whoever the professor is, find out what their definitions of these are. Okay? Bless you. All right. So, now I'm going to hand out my list. This is the resources that I used to create this. And you'll notice that where I talked about the writing and the pre-writing, on that slide, I cited that reference. Okay? Now, I have these style guides here. Alright? If you don't know, you ask. If the professor doesn't say, this is the format, this is the style, ask. Okay? Because you want to know that you're doing it right.
Is this APA style or what?
Pardon?
Is this APA style?
No, I think it's MLA style.
Because we use PO first notification.
Yeah. Yeah, I asked a student to do this, and I'm pretty sure it's MLA. Okay. So, and then I have one more. Okay. And this also comes from the James Lipson. This comes right out of his book. It's to give you some guidelines for quoting without plagiarizing. Okay, so, any questions? Alright, now one last thing. Plagiarism revisited. Ignorance of the law is no excuse, and how do you eat an elephant? Are those plagiarized? Those sentences? No, they're not. They're common phrases. Alright? Now, here's the thing about this. If you went into your paper and you wrote, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? Your professor is probably not going to like that because it's common. Okay? And he wants to know what you're thinking, he or she. Okay? Ignorance of the law is no excuse. That's something I have heard my entire life. It's just one of those things that people say, okay? And it's a shortcut to tell you you're responsible. It's your responsibility. If you didn't know the rules, then you should have learned the rules, okay? So, understand that there is a difference between using what is common knowledge and plagiarizing, okay? Make sure that you're not crossing that line. Okay, I'm done. Thank you all for coming. Oh, wow.